Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome in. Good to see all of you this morning. It's a beautiful day, and we're glad that you're here with us this morning as we open God's Word together. Here in this class, if you've not been with us or if you're visiting, just a real quick overview of where we're going with this. We are studying a series of lessons that we've entitled Conversations with God, and we're looking specifically at some passages in the Bible, some books in the Bible, that constitute largely conversations that people had with God. And to that end, we just completed last week a 4-week study in the book of Habakkuk. And Habakkuk, maybe more so than any of the books that we're going to be looking at, is the most explicitly clear example of this idea of a conversation with God, where Habakkuk talks to God, God talks back to Habakkuk, then Habakkuk talks to God, God talks back to Habakkuk. And you have this back and forth dialogue that takes its place over the course of those 3 chapters that make up that book. Having concluded that, I wanted to put a little bow on that and wrap that up. I recognize that for the last couple of weeks, in fact, the last 2 weeks very specifically, I have hit the ground on an absolute blur and not even paused to take a breath, let alone to allow you any conversation with me. Interesting in a topic of conversation that I have allowed so little. But nonetheless, this morning, if you would be so kind as to open up with me to Habakkuk chapter 1, as we put a bow on this. Habakkuk chapter 1 starts this way, and I'll pick it up in verse 2. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, and you do not listen, or cry out about violence, and you do not save? Why do you force me to look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Oppression and violence are right in front of me. Strife is ongoing and conflict escalates. This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges. For the wicked restrict the righteous, and therefore justice comes out perverted. We set up the book of Habakkuk by talking about the fact that it is an incredibly timely book and it is an incredibly timeless book. What I mean by that is that it is very applicable today. So much of what we see in these first 4 verses, you and I can look around in our world today and say, check, 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 we got all that. But it's timeless in the reality that every single period in human history, every single person reading this could have looked at it and gone, check, 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 we got that. And so this is an incredibly beautiful picture. It's not. It's an incredibly dark picture. But it's an incredibly timely and timeless picture of the kinds of problems that society does face and will always face. It is a book that talks about the realities of the world in which we live. It concludes this way in chapter 3. And in chapter 3, I'll start reading in verse 17 of Habakkuk. Though the fig tree does not bud and there is no fruit on the vines, the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though the flocks disappear from the pen and though herds are found in the stalls, yet I will celebrate in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. What we made the point of is that between chapter 1 verse 2 and chapter 3 verse 17, nothing got better. There wasn't anything in Habakkuk's world that said, God has swooped in, He's straightened it all out, He's fixed it, everything's rosy. But chapter 1 begins with despair, chapter 3 concludes with hope. Chapter 1 begins with pessimism, chapter 3 concludes with optimism. And the difference, the secret, the key to all that is the reality of where Habakkuk has decided to place his focus. Habakkuk turned his focus from the problems of this world to the God of the universe. And in doing so, his perspective changed in a drastic way. And I hope that if we can take anything from our several week study in Habakkuk, it's that. When we take our eyes off of a constant obsessive fixation of the problems of this world and place that same kind of emphasis on looking upon the God of the universe, we're going to find our perspective gets much different and our perspective gets much better. Whereas this is a timeless book, I will say that I think this particular problem is more prevalent right now than it has been. Because it is such an incredible American obsession to sit down and watch everything terrible going on in the world limitlessly, constantly, without any end. And I think that it is very impossible for us to get to the optimistic, hopeful tone of Habakkuk 3 if we constantly spend all of our time in the hopeless lostness of chapter 1. So, having said that, recognizing I haven't let you talk in 2 weeks, I'm just going to pause and say, as we've come to the conclusion of Habakkuk, before we begin our new book of study for this section of the quarter, I wanted to just open it up. What spoke to you in this study? What did you take out of this? What questions, comments remain? Yes, CJ. Yeah. 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 I think you've said a couple things in there that are really poignant to not only this book, but to our world today. And that is this idea that so oftentimes when we face those things that are out of our control, that's when we feel hopeless. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but in reality, how much do you really have control of? How much do we really have control of? There's not a lot. There's not a lot that is completely within our control. The Stoics taught us that the only thing we can control is our own emotions, our own actions, and our own thoughts. Everything else beyond that is something that's outside of us to control. And aren't we glad that there's a God in heaven who is doing that? The other part of that, CJ, that I think is really important to recognize is that reality of when things happen outside our control that are so tragic, it is really hard to not ask the question, why did you allow this? Why did you let this happen, God? And I think this opens up an enormous discussion venue that we could have on the whole idea of what does it mean to live as people under free will? What does it mean that we live in a situation that God has allowed us to make choices? And the reality that the choices we make have wide-ranging consequences, the extent of which we often have no comprehension of. And recognizing that, I think, is important. I think that one way that helps me, instead of asking, well, I still ask the question, why are you letting this happen? Because we all do. But the thing that I try to counter with that in my mind is the reality that what we're experiencing, seeing in the darkness of this world is a series of choices that man has made away from God. That's how we got here. And that still then allows me to recognize that when I am down in that pit of despair, God's joining me. God is as sorry to see these things occurring as I am, and I find comfort in that. Thank you. Yes, Renee. Yeah. 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 That is one of the best known quotes in Habakkuk that nobody knows is in Habakkuk. People have heard, the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence before him. We've heard that. There's a little song we sang when we were kids. Some of you may remember that. But if I just out of context were to say, where does that come from in the Bible? You'd probably guess 13 books before you'd probably guess 65 books before you get to Habakkuk. But that's a really important concept in the middle of this. And you said it very well, Renee. In those dark times, we start grasping for answers, for help, for solutions. We start looking around us and saying, things are spinning out of control. What can I control? What can I place my trust in? And you well called them idols, because that's what they are. Anytime we look at tomorrow and say, I can face tomorrow because of blank, and God is not in the blank, we have an idol. That's just the simple reality of it. Anytime I can say tomorrow can be a good day because I have, fill it in, that's an idol. Because I am trusting in something that's not God to do what only God can do. And I think that's the realization that Habakkuk makes over time in this. Everything's going down the tubes, but I know the Lord is in his holy temple. I know that to be true. And that's why he can say at the end, I will celebrate. I will rejoice. I find my strength in him. Because instead of latching on to idols and desperately grasping for control, he's understood that the reality is to put trust in God and celebrate him. Thank you. Excellent. Anybody else? Other thoughts? Daniel.
I can't help but wonder, those prophets probably work well, like, even with their community.
Yeah.
Like, so this happened before they were started off and captured Babylonian captivity. And he probably dealt with it in his
Yeah.
because these are his people, these are like one of us. And only one of us carrying, and the rest are not doing what God wants. Now you super frustrating, and then you probably alienated even among the community.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jesus said a prophet is never accepted in his hometown. I would argue that an Old Testament prophet was never accepted in his whole country. Yeah, it was all bad news all the time. I mean, for the most part, the prophets had a really rough job. The prophets had a really difficult task ahead of them. It was unpopular. They were declaring things that the people did not want to hear and were resistant to. Not only did they not want to believe it, but they actively worked against it. Go back and look at, Jeremiah. He had a really happy life. Some of these prophets had Jonah. Look at Jonah. God's like, hey, Jonah, I'm going to call you to be a prophet. Jonah's like, I'm up out of here. It was not something that people wanted. And so I think that adds to a little bit of the despair, the turmoil that Habakkuk would have been feeling. Not only am I a part of this country and this country is going to experience this, not only am I a member of this society and this society is going to experience this, but in the time that I'm sitting here telling people it's coming, I'm going to be hated. I'm going to be attacked. I'm going to be, come after. And so whatever the ancient version of at me was, he got tons of it. Good points. Thank you. Yes, Roger. Oh, that's right. We have talked about that. That's right. When we talk about the fact that a prophet is a entity that speaks on behalf of God, one of Roger and I's favorite prophets of the Old Testament was a donkey who spoke to Balaam. And you're right. He almost got beat down to within an inch of his life. And if they're going to do that to donkeys, yeah, he only had one sentence. Yeah, Mary Ellen. Yeah, we do.
So, thank you.
Well,
Jeff,
thank you.
Bishop, and our elders for mixing it up.
Well,
And thank you for this class. This is reality. We need to wake up.
yeah. Well, I thank you. I appreciate that. And I recognize, just as recent as this past Wednesday, I got slapped. If you were in class here Wednesday night, Bishop did some slapping. And I went home stinging from it. And so I will say to you that thank you that we do try to do that, but we are also very much the recipients of that when it's done. And I think that is important. Yeah, Brandon. The what? Oh, the donkey? The story of the donkey. So, I probably should tell that story real quick. Balaam, let's see. Balaam's donkey was seeing an angel that was blocking the path, and so was refusing to go. And so Balaam was just beating the living snot out of this donkey, and the donkey started talking to him. And the surprising thing was, he didn't freak out about the fact the donkey was talking to him. He actually was more freaked out about the content of the donkey's conversation. But he said, I've been your servant all these years, and I've never done you any wrong. Why would you come at me with a stick like this? And it was an interesting time where, and I think, Roger, if I remember the conversation we had on this, it was something along the lines of, if God can use a donkey, he can use you, Jeff. And so I find that somewhere between, we are here speaking like prophets, and even Jeff can be used like a donkey. Somewhere in there is a place where I can find the encouragement I need and the humility that I require. And that's why I love y'all. Other thoughts, comments? Let's jump into Haggai. I know we're skipping around a little bit. It's not the next book, but it's the next conversation that we're going to be looking at. And we're going to be looking at this book of Haggai for the next several weeks. When I start this series, I told you that the first week of every new book, we would be looking at the person, the man, the prophet. We would be looking a really quick overview of the book, and we would be looking at a purpose of his ministry. I don't know why I was not in preacher mode, and it couldn't alliterate that. Man, message, and mission would have been a much better way to say that. So from this point forward, I'll probably use that. But today we're going to be looking at Haggai. And I'll begin with this question. What do you do? This is a rhetorical question. What do you do when you come to the realization that you've been working on your own kingdom instead of working on God's kingdom? What do you do when you come to the realization that your priorities have been around your business and not, as Jesus famously called it at age 12, my Father's business? What do you do when you look at your life and you look at your to-do lists and you look at the way you expend your energy and you come to the realization that your focus is not kingdom focus? I often will talk about the 3 books that will determine your life and show you important to you. And I know these are a little antiquated in their notion, but you get the point still. Those 3 books are your checkbook, your agenda or calendar, and your journal. Your checkbook is where you spend your treasure. Where you spend your treasure is where your heart will be. Taking a look at your checkbook. How am I spending my money? How am I appropriating these financial resources that God gave me? Are they appropriated in a way that's kingdom focused, or are they appropriated in a way that's Jeff focused? Second, your calendar or agenda. This is what I plan to do today, what I plan to do tomorrow, what I plan to do next week, how I plan to use this incredible resource, this wonderful gift that God's given us of time. How do I plan to use that? How do I plan to put those resources into work? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be. The third is the journal. And at least for me, you guys know I'm a huge journaler. And everybody should be. I'm not judging, but everybody should be. No, I'm just kidding. But a journal is what you actually did. A journal is commonly, at the end of the day, what did I actually do today? I know what I planned to do. That's my calendar. But what did I actually do? When situations came up, what distracted me from what I planned to do? When opportunities came up, what did I jump at that was more important than what I thought I was going to do? What did I really do with my time? How do I spend my treasure, finances? How do I spend my treasure, time? How do I spend my everyday real moments and energy, treasure? How do I spend these? And it says a lot about what's really important to us. In the book of Haggai, what we're going to see is a group of people who had their priorities wrong. A group of people who were working on their kingdom and not working on God's kingdom. Their priorities were in the wrong place. And that came to the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book was largely built around this premise of calling God's people to rebuild the temple. What we've got here is a before and after kind of picture in some ways, because we've got Habakkuk, the exile is coming. We've got Haggai, the exile is over. Now, it's not over for everybody. There's still people there. More will come back. It's a process. But what we've got is a before and after kind of thing. And what we've got here is a situation where the people have a priority. The people who have come back home, the people who have repopulated their cities that are back in their national, borders, have given their efforts to their homes and their businesses and their economy and their comforts and their pleasures, and those are where they're spending their treasure. Those are the areas that they're expending their time. Those are the areas that they're expending their financial resources. And God is saying, what about the temple? Not exclusively and only because it's a building, but the whole concept about that. If you are giving resources and energy and effort to rebuilding the temple, there needs to be a motive behind that. God's speaking more to that motive behind it than actually the process of construction on the temple itself. And he's saying, in essence, the same thing Jesus would say years later. Where's your heart? Where's your heart? Because I see where you're spending your treasure. And God's like, I got an inkling that where you're pouring your treasure out is probably an indication of where your heart is. So he's trying to remind the people that God's presence among the people, that God's glory among the people, that God being the centerpiece of the Jewish people is more important than the comforts that they experience day to day and their own well-paneled homes. So that's the purpose of the book, to call people back to a revival of God and a rebuilding of His temple. What about Haggai? Well, like is true with many of the minor prophets, we really don't know much at all. We don't have a lot of understanding about him. Scholars who study these things tell us that he probably was an older prophet. There's some reasons they go into with that, with the time frame and situation and circumstance and those to whom he had the most clout. But suffice it to say that one side note helpful thing about Haggai for us to understand is that until he was well up in age, we don't know anything about him. You see, I think sometimes we get this idea that the natural progression of the Christian experience is to ramp up ideally, in your young years, to be raised up, in your young adult years, to begin to learn leadership and learn contribution and learn to participate in ministry, and then to, as you get older, lead in those ministries, to lead in those opportunities, to become someone who's really looked upon as a driving force in the church. And then we have this mentality that you get to a certain age and it all quit. It all just goes away. And sometimes that's done from a pessimistic, I'm just old and I don't have anything to offer anymore idea. Sometimes that comes from just the reality of being tired. Sometimes that comes to the stage of life that we're in where no longer are we as stationary as we once were. Many people move around a lot, travel, different things. But the reality is that sometimes the Christian experience is one that at the end finds a precipitous drop in participation. Not so with Haggai. Haggai's story goes like unknown, 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 really old, boom, really important, boom, never heard of again. His whole ministry probably only lasted about 4 months. In fact, we're going to see that this book includes just a few days is all we really see in the scope of this book. And his ministry had a very, very short time frame. I already mentioned that he comes after the exile. They get carted off. They start trickling back, and he's going to immediately precede prophets like Zechariah and Malachi. Randy, did you have a question? Okay, I thought you were waving at me. I just wanted to make sure I didn't shoot past you. So, the person of Haggai, the purpose of the book, and we're going to look now at just a real quick breakdown of how Haggai's mission is portrayed in the book. What we're going to see in this is that there are largely 4 conversations. Now, these are a little more one-sided than what we saw in Habakkuk. Habakkuk talked to God, God talked back to Habakkuk, back and forth, back and forth. This is a little bit more true to the prophetic nature, where God is giving a message for him to share. And the message is largely going to fall around these 4 themes, these 4 conversations. The first one is found in chapter 1, verses 1 through 15. And this is the idea that God is saying, you need to glorify God. You need to get your priorities right. You need to get the first stuff first. The first thing is to make sure the first thing is always the first thing. And you guys have got the first thing wrong. Chapter 2, the first 9 verses, is going to be a statement of, okay, you've started to right the ship. Okay, you've started to get back on the path. You've started down the right path. Now keep going. Keep going, because one of the great problems and challenges in life is it takes all this effort to get moving, to get on the right path, and then we quickly run out of energy along the way, and we need encouragement. We need to be refueled. Paul would write very famously, I'm in Titus right now in my personal Bible study, and he talks about remind them of these things. Remind them, keep them focused. He's saying continue to encourage them, continue to push them forward, because our natural tendency is that once we expend all this energy and God gets us on the right track, we can slow down and become bogged down. And he says, don't do that. Stay committed. Stay focused. Chapter 2, verses 10 through 19. His next one is the importance of living holy lives. Living holy lives. He's going to say, in essence, to these people, hey, you know what? Some of these pagan nations around you, some of these heathen countries around you, these people, they're going to see me when they see you if you're living holy lives. Scott Cottrell used to gather up all the staff at camp every day. Every day he'd make us all do this thing where he'd say, God, let them see you in us. And he'd make us do it over and over and over and over. And that's exactly the idea here, is that we are to live such holy and upright lives that the people around us notice there's something different, something's up. Those people don't live like us, act like us. There's something unique about them. The word holy means separate and set apart for a sacred purpose, not a common usage. And he says, you're supposed to be my holy people. And so he's encouraging them to live holy lives. And the final one, hard times are still going to come. You're going to go out and you're going to get on the right path, and you're going to continue enthusiastically down the right path, and you're going to strive to live holy lives. And guess what? It's still going to be hard. It's still going to be tough. It's not like I'm going to get on this right path, I'm going to try to focus on holy living, and everything wonderful is going to fall in my lap, and the path is going to be smooth and easy and simple ahead of me. That's not the case. But what he does say is, chapter 2, verses 20 through 23, God's kingdom is going to prevail. God's kingdom is going to prevail. God says, I'm going to have the last word. I'm going to be the final answer. I'm going to be there. Will it be hard? Yeah. Will there be challenges? Yeah. Do you have to make changes? Yeah. But God's kingdom will prevail. It's going to succeed in the end. So these are our conversations that are going to take place in the book, and they also make the bulk of our 4 little studies as we take a look at this particular book. Okay, I didn't give a lot of detail there, but are there any particular questions that you have as we get started in this about the man or the mission, things that you know that you could inform me of? Yes, he was, and there also is a lot of confusion because there's like 3 Dariuses, and you got to juggle all these names to figure out the right time period. But yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, it's really amazing. It's really amazing today, the scientific discoveries that we've made, historical discoveries that we've made of documents. You remember a couple of weeks ago I was talking to you about this document, the early days of the empire, an actual court record of the Babylonian people. It is phenomenal that here we are all these years later and we still have this stuff and can read it. Very much the case. We do have historical evidence of Darius, and Darius was very well disposed towards the Jews by virtue of the fact that they were back, that he had allowed them to return, that he had provided some support for their means of return, and that is something that I think can be best explained in the providence of God. Because it's not like he just reached down deep in his calloused, heartless soul and decided, I think I'll randomly be nice to these people. I think it's an example of God working even in the most unlikely of characters. Even more than a donkey, Roger.
For some reason, it strikes me in the back of my mind that Darius found some old writings himself, and one of his people, his advisors, to look into it, and then he decided to start being. I'm thinking it was Darius. I may have that confused with somebody else.
I'm making a note right now because I'll see what I can find on that. I'm not familiar with that off the top. If both of us do, then maybe we'll have something better. Yeah, let's look into that. Yeah, Jen. No, and that's where things get a little weird. Yeah, Yeah. But like many monarchs in that day, and frankly, monarchs in our day today, they continue to replay the same names over and over. Good question. Let's jump into the text. I need a bigger podium or fewer books. Actually, I just need a coffee cup holder. Whatever. That's really all. I'd be fine, except for that. Haggai chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. In the second year of King Darius, on the first day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai, to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. The Lord of armies says this, these people say, this time has not come for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. The word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai, is it a time for you yourselves to live in your paneled houses while this house lies in ruin? Now the Lord of armies says this, think carefully about your ways. You have planted much but harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough to be satisfied. You drink, but you never have enough to be happy. You put on clothes, but you never have enough to get warm. The wage earner puts his wages into a bag with a hole in it. The Lord of armies says this, think carefully about your ways. Go up into the hills and bring down lumber and build the house, and I will be pleased with it and be glorified, says the Lord. You expected much, but then it amounted to little. When you brought the harvest to your house, I ruined it. Why? This is a declaration of the Lord of armies, because my house still lies in ruins, while each of you is so busy with his own house. So on your account, the skies have withheld the dew, and the land its crops. I have summoned a drought on the fields and the hills, on the grain, the new wine, the fresh oils, and whatever the ground yields on man and animal, and all that your hands produce. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the high priest Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, and the entire remnant of the people obeyed the Lord, their God, and the words of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him. So the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, delivered the Lord's message to the people. I am with you. This is the Lord's declaration. The Lord roused the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, the spirit of the high priest of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people, and they began to work on the house of the Lord of armies, their God, on the 24th day of the 6th month in the 2nd year of King Darius. 16 years have passed since they arrived back in Jerusalem. 16 years. That's important for you to note, because we're not talking about they just rolled in yesterday. Okay? We're not talking about they just showed up last week and they're just trying to scratch out some settlement. They're just trying to, piece together some place to put a shelter over their head. They've been here 16 years. That's longer than I've been here. They've been there 16 years, and in those 16 years, they have not yet begun to pick up a tool to start rebuilding the temple of God. And they have an answer. It's not time yet. The time has not come yet. This is not the right moment. I don't think that excuse has changed over time. We put a lot of other things in there instead of, rebuild this house. We have our other things. But if you'll be honest with yourself, and I'll be honest with myself, I think we could look at our lives and recognize things that are good things, that are godly things, that are things that the Holy Spirit is pressing on our soul, that we say over and over and over and over, it's not time. This is not the time. Usually our answer is, I'm too busy. Usually our answer is, I don't have the proper resources right now. I don't have whatever it is. This is not the time. And I think to us, God would whisper, or maybe shout, is it a time for you yourselves to live in paneled houses? You have time. Well, I have time. I have evidence of that time because of the stuff that I am spending my time on. I always say to people, I say to a select group of people that I can be really vulnerable with and honest, that say to me, I don't have time. I say, did you eat today? I ate today. I'll tell you what, I haven't missed a meal in quite a while. I have this uncanny ability. I don't care how busy my day is. I can figure out some way. Maybe it's running through Burger King on the way between appointments, which is absolutely atrocious, that I should not keep doing that to my body. But you know what I don't do is skip meals. I don't skip meals. I know this isn't something everybody does, but man, I get good sleep. I am ruthless about my sleep. I'm like, boop, 9:30, wind it down. It's time. You know what? Because I make that a priority. I get the things I want to do, I get done. The things I want to do get done. Now, this is going to really hurt me because you're going to be like, wait a minute, you've been saying you're going to do this. And I know I'm going to be like, I know, I'm totally convicted. I have no excuse whatsoever. The things we want to do, we get done. So I want you to listen. I want myself to listen. I said to myself, listen, myself. And I want us to take into account the realization that when we find ourselves saying, this isn't the time, it's not usually a matter of time. It's usually a matter of heart. It's not usually a matter of ticks on a clock. It's a matter of ticks in our heartbeat. That's where the problem, the heart of the matter is that we have a heart problem. And that's really where a lot of this comes down to, and that's exactly what we're going to see was the problem here. And one of the reasons why I think this is an incredibly timeless and timely message. They expended their resources, their treasure, their time on things that mattered to them, and they proved where their treasure was. Their treasure was on their comfort. And God rebukes them for this. Now, I want you to notice with me, you've got your Bibles open. Let's take a real quick scan here at 6, verse 6. And then we're going to contrast that with verse 10 and 11, okay? And here's what I think. Here's what I think. The majority of verse 6 is attitudinal. The majority of 10:11 is reality. And here's what I mean by this. You eat, but you never have enough to be satisfied. You drink, but you never have enough to be happy. You put on clothes, but you never have enough to get warm. Some would say, you put on clothes, but you're never satisfied. The wage earner puts his wages into a bag with a hole in it. I'm saying to you, I'm suggesting Jeff's opinion, big neon sign behind me. Jeff's opinion is this is a matter of attitude. Because that's what I believe Haggai, God through Haggai, is addressing here. You're not content. You're greedy. You're not content. You're striving. You're not happy with what you have. You want more, you want more, you want more, you want more. Because it says you do eat, but you want more. You do drink, but you want more. You got clothes, but you want more. That sound like any place you've ever been? Sound like any time period in world history? Sounds a lot like 2025. Because I don't know that I got to stop saying stuff like that. I believe right now in this moment, we epitomize so much of this greed culture. Consumer. I want more. I have what I need, but I want what I want. I want more of what I have. I want more. I want enough. I want it. I want it. We're in the middle of verse 9. It says, you never have enough to be satisfied. In pleo noni procul soleo. Content, but not complacent. Content, but not complacent. They're not content. All they want is more, more, more. I think in verse 6, he's addressing their attitude. In verse 10 and 11, he's addressing their reality. I haven't let it grow like you wanted it to. I've withheld the rains. I've not allowed the crops to grow. I'm not going to make a comparison to the greatest drought in 100 years in Ohio history. But you can connect those dots. What? Well, we need it. And I know why they didn't get rain. Why are we not getting rain? Again, I'm not going there. Yeah, Jen.
Careful what you pray.
Yeah, that's true. We have to form our prayers very carefully, don't we? Give us rain in a very adequate amount that doesn't wash out. Yeah, kind of. Although, thankfully, as we'll talk about today, none of that's really up to us to have to craft because the Holy Spirit does that for us, thank God. Verse 6, attitudes, verses 10 and 11, realities. And I think there's a reason that attitudes come before realities. I believe there's a reason that he lists one before he lists the other, because I think if we'll be honest with ourselves, many of our realities would look different if our perspective was different. If we were acting out of a place of contentment, we would find what we have is fulfilling. If we were acting out of a place of contentment, we would find great comfort and great gratitude and great thanksgiving for what we do have. If we are focused out of a perspective of greed, nothing will ever be enough. Nothing will ever be enough. And this is a timeless problem that we continue to see. I'm going to hit a couple things in real quick succession because I have 2 minutes here, and then when we come back next week, we'll recap some of this because I know I'm going to finish this last part really hard and really fast. In verse 12 it says, they obeyed the Lord. One of the quickest returns in all of the minor prophets. He comes out one time, says, hey, you need to look at this. And they go, whew, we need to look at this. And immediately they begin to make changes in their life. In fact, it's really crazy. When you look at verse 1, when you look at the first verse in the chapter, the last verse in the chapter, this whole thing consists of like 20 days or something. It's a really quick thing. This is a quick response. This is here's a problem, and now we're going to go solve it. I don't know about you, in my life, a lot of times it takes a whole lot more than 20 days for me to get started on anything. And they showed us. Verse 14, it says, the Lord roused the spirit of these three guys. The Lord roused the spirit. And I think there's a specific order in which this is portrayed here, because he roused the spirit of the leaders, and then what happens? The spirit of the people are roused. He roused the spirit of the leaders, and the spirit of the people were roused to action. And I think that's God's plan. I think that's God's pattern. I think that's what God continues to do. I think that's what God is doing today in the church. And as He rouses up people who will step into positions of leadership, then those people in turn have an opportunity to rouse the people to good works. And I think that this is an important theme that we're going to see over and over and over again in this book. Lord of armies. Did you hear that phrase in there? I think it was in 4 times in this chapter. 14 times. Lord of armies. Lord of armies. It's a highly technical. Yahweh Sabaoth is a name that God uses for Himself regularly. It means Lord of hosts. And what that means is, wherever you see power, God is over it. If you see host was used to talk about vast armies, that's power. God's over that. Host was used to talk about the stars in the sky, the solar systems, the galaxies. That's power. God's over that. Host is used to talk in the Bible about the angelic beings. Myriad, hundreds of thousands of these incredibly powerful angels. God's over it. Lord of armies says, anywhere you see power in the universe, remember, God's greater than that. We'll talk more about what that means at a different time. I'll finish with this thought. Twice in this section we read this phrase, think carefully about your ways. Twice God says, think carefully about your ways. I just want to end this right here for now with that thought. We're about to step into a new work week. We're about to go back into our workaday lives. And I want to really place upon us this challenge that God placed upon the people in the book of Haggai, and that is to think seriously about our ways. God willing, you're going to wake up tomorrow and He's going to give you a portion of hours. He's going to give you a portion of energy. He's going to give you a portion of resources. And God would say to us, think about how you use this. Consider your ways. Think about your choices. Think about your priorities. Think about what God calls us to do and to be. We'll pick it up in verse 14 next week. Thank you.
Test, test. Test, test.